He wired the money without a word. $42,000 appeared in Eden's account at 11:52 on a Wednesday night, the exact amount she'd spent on the lease deposit and first year's build-out for the cafe, with a memo field that read, "Concluded." Not goodbye, not an explanation, not even her name. Just one word and a number that said, "We're even, and we're done." Eden stared at her phone in the dark of her apartment on Damen Avenue, the notification glowing against her face, and understood with complete clarity that Quentin Ashford had just paid her off the same way his family paid off every inconvenience. Quietly, efficiently, without looking at it directly. What he didn't know, what she hadn't told him, was that she'd taken a test 3 days before the wire hit. She'd been carrying the result in her coat pocket since Monday like a piece of paper she wasn't ready to file. She was 8 weeks pregnant. She sat on her bathroom floor for a long time that night, not because she was falling apart. She'd already done that in the 2 days between the test and the wire, but because the floor was cold and real and asked nothing of her, and she needed something that asked nothing of her. Before we go any further, if this kind of thing has ever sat in your chest like a stone you couldn't move, drop your city in the comments. I want to know how far this reaches. And stay, because it gets harder before it gets lighter. A lot harder. Now, let's go back to where it started. Eden Calloway had built her life around the honest logic of coffee. Not as philosophy, she'd have rolled her eyes at anyone who said that, but as fact. Good coffee required attention. It didn't negotiate. You either extracted it correctly or you burned it, and the difference was visible the second the cup hit the counter. There was a clarity to that she'd loved since she was 17, working weekends at a small shop on Milwaukee Avenue, learning to pull shots from a man named Gil who said almost nothing and expected almost everything. By the time she was 26, she'd saved enough to lease a space in Wicker Park. Not a big space, 12 tables, a bar, a back room she converted into storage with her own hands over one long October weekend. She named it Bloom for no complicated reason. She just liked the word. She liked the idea that something small could open if given the right conditions. She'd been running it for 8 months when Quentin Ashford walked in. She didn't know who he was. That part mattered later. She had no reason to recognize a man whose family's name appeared on the side of 2 buildings downtown and in the business section of the Tribune maybe twice a year. He was just a man in an expensive coat who ordered a pour-over and stood at the bar to drink it like someone who hadn't sat down in 2 days and wasn't sure he remembered how. He came back the next Friday, then the Thursday after that, then most Thursdays for the following 4 months. They talked the way 2 careful people talk when they're both aware they're making a mistake in slow motion. He asked about the coffee with genuine curiosity, not performing it, actually there. She told him about extraction ratios, about why she sourced beans from a small importer in Bridgeport, about the difference between what coffee tasted like when you rushed it and what it tasted like when you didn't. He listened like she was explaining something that mattered. She found out who he was in March. A woman left a copy of Cranes on the bar, open to a profile piece. His photograph was on the page. She read the article once, and then she looked up, and he was already pushing through the front door. She didn't move the magazine. He saw it. He sat down. All of it, or what she believed at the time was all of it, with the flat economy of a man who had decided that honesty was the least he owed her. Ashford Capital, 3 generations. His father's death 2 years ago, leaving him the controlling stake, and a board that had been making decisions he was trying to claw back ever since. He said it like a man reading from a document he hadn't written. "Why are you telling me this?" she said. "Because you're already holding the magazine," he said. She should have put the magazine down and walked him to the door. She was 27 years old, with a small cafe and a lease that still had 18 months of personal guarantee exposure on it. He was a man whose family's legal team had more people than she had customers on a slow Tuesday. The math was obvious. She didn't walk him to the door. For 7 months, she didn't. She met his world piece by piece, the way you learn a neighborhood by walking it in different weather. She met Ridley, his head of security, a quiet man with the specific stillness of someone who had trained himself never to be the most alarming thing in any room. She learned that Quentin's phone existed on a schedule that had no relationship to normal hours, and that some of those calls left him at her kitchen table at 2 in the morning looking at a cup of coffee he'd forgotten to drink. She also fell in love with him, completely and inconveniently. The way you fall into a thing you know is probably going to leave a mark. And then one evening in October, exactly a year after he'd first walked into Bloom, she came home to find an email in her inbox, corporate address. The subject line was blank. Inside, 2 sentences. The Drummond partnership requires a formal commitment. Effective immediately, I will be honoring the arrangement my father made with Harlan Drummond in 2019. Below the sentences, a name she didn't recognize, Victoria Drummond. And below that, in language she would later understand was written by lawyers rather than by him. A note that the prior relationship was considered concluded and that any financial irregularities would be resolved within 72 hours. The wire hit 2 days later. She did not call him. She thought about it, sat with her phone in her hand at midnight and at 2 in the morning and at 4, running the calculation that only had one honest answer. What did safety look like for a child whose father was in the middle of a corporate merger with a man whose name appeared in 3 different federal investigations over the past decade? What happened to a child who became a bargaining chip before she was old enough to hold a crayon? Eden had learned from her mother, who had raised her alone in a 2-bedroom apartment on the north side after her father left, that some decisions looked like giving up but were actually the clearest form of love available. Her mother had never said it in those words. She'd just done it year after year without asking for credit. Eden took the lesson. She gave Tamsin, her only full-time employee and her closest friend, a raise and a promotion to manager. She didn't explain why. Tamsin accepted both and didn't push, which was one of the things Eden valued most about her. She changed her phone number. She moved to a sublet in Lincoln Square while her lease situation resolved. She told 3 people, her mother, who was 61 and sharp and said only okay, and then asked what she needed, Tamsin, who cried and then immediately started problem solving, and herself in the mirror of a bathroom she'd be out of in 6 weeks, with the particular steadiness that comes after a decision has already been made. She left on a Tuesday. She found an apartment 2 neighborhoods away from anywhere she'd ever taken Quentin. She paid cash for the first 3 months from savings she'd built quietly, not because she'd anticipated any of this, but because her mother had always said that a woman who didn't have money she controlled herself didn't actually have money. She was 28 years old and 2 months pregnant and starting over, and she was terrified, and she was, in some quiet part of herself she didn't examine too closely, certain. Lila was born in July, 6 pounds 14 ounces, with a full head of dark hair and the most skeptical expression Eden had ever seen on a person who was less than 3 minutes old. The midwife said that was just their face at first. Eden suspected it was permanent. She was right. She named her Lila because she liked the way it sat in the mouth. Simple, no weight attached to it, no history. This child would have a name that meant exactly what Eden decided it meant. The first year was the hardest. By the time Lila was 2 and had developed loud opinions about which shoes were acceptable, for which occasions Eden had rebuilt Bloom, not the original location, a new one, 3 blocks north. With better light and a small outdoor patio, she'd designed herself over one long winter with graph paper and a YouTube tutorial on concrete forms. It was a real life, honest, the way coffee was honest, and it was enough. It had been enough until the morning of the private booking. The request came through Bloom's catering line on a Thursday, a small event booking for the back patio. Corporate name she didn't recognize, party of 2 adults and 1 child. A 9 o'clock setup. Tamsin was supposed to handle it, but Tamsin had a doctor's appointment she'd rescheduled twice already, and the backup had called in sick, and it was Thursday, which meant it was Eden's floor. She built the tray herself. The process was automatic. the small batch pour-overs in the thermal carafe, the pastries from the woman 3 blocks over she'd been sourcing from for 2 years, the house-made cardamom syrup that had been on the menu since the first week because a customer had once described it as the thing that makes this place feel like somewhere. She poured water. She checked the table. She pushed through the patio door with the tray balanced in both hands and said, "Good morning, welcome to," and stopped. He was sitting with his back to the morning sun, which meant she saw him as silhouette first, the line of his jaw, the way he held himself like a man who had learned to be still because stillness was the version of himself that gave the least away. The specific quality of presence she had spent 4 years convincing herself she'd misremembered. Quentin Ashford looked up from his phone, and across 8 feet of reclaimed wood table, their eyes met. Neither of them moved. Beside him, a woman in a pale linen blazer with the kind of effortless grooming that suggested a full-time support staff looked up and smiled at Eden with the polite attention of someone who didn't know she was watching the beginning of something catastrophic. And next to the woman, in a booster seat, the woman had clearly brought herself. It had a monogram, sat a little girl, maybe 4 years old, dark hair, wide eyes, already considering something. She looked up from the small board book in her lap and gave Eden a smile so open and uncomplicated it was almost painful. Eden set the tray down on the service cart, both hands. She needed the support. "Good morning," she said. Her voice came out level. She had no idea how. "I'll give you a moment to get settled." She turned around and walked back out the door. She made it to the storage hallway before she put her back against the wall and pressed both palms flat against the plaster and breathed through her nose, counting the way she'd learned during labor. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4, until the roaring in her ears settled into something manageable. He was here, in her cafe, with a woman in pale linen and a child in a monogrammed booster seat, and he looked exactly the same except for something around his eyes that she recognized as the particular weight of someone who had been carrying something heavier than they'd let anyone see. She had 7 seconds to decide what to do. She pushed off the wall. She straightened her apron. She went back in. Because she was Eden Calloway, and she had spent 4 years becoming exactly the person this moment was going to need her to be. The woman's name, she pieced together from context, was Victoria. She had a voice designed to be listened to and a way of resting her hand on Quentin's forearm with the comfortable ownership of someone who had stopped noticing the gesture. Eden refilled water. She answered Victoria's questions about the cardamom syrup sourcing with the precision of someone who genuinely cared about the answer, because she did. The work had been the thing that kept her upright on the mornings when upright was the harder option. Quentin said almost nothing. He drank his coffee. He watched Eden with a steadiness she felt on the back of her neck every time she turned away. The little girl, Victoria called her Petra, fell asleep in the booster seat at the 40-minute mark, her cheek resting on her own shoulder. A crayon rolled from her hand onto the patio stone without waking her. When Victoria excused herself to take a phone call inside, the patio went quiet in a specific way, the kind of quiet that has mass. Eden was clearing the small plates. She did not look at him. "You need to go," she said quietly. "I know." "Then why are you still sitting there?" "Because I need 5 minutes." "You don't get 5 minutes." She looked at him then, because she hadn't intended to say what came next out loud, and needed to see his face when she did. "You forfeited 5 minutes a long time ago." He looked older, not badly, but there was something behind his eyes that hadn't been there before. The particular weight of a man who'd been living with a decision he couldn't take back. "I know what I did," he said. "Then you know why I need you to pay and go." "I found out about her 11 months ago." The plates stopped moving. She held them. She didn't set them down. "Ridley ran a routine security sweep," Quentin said. His voice was completely level. "Anyone in my proximity who might be used as leverage, he found you. He found that you had a daughter." She set the plates down carefully, because she needed something to do with her hands that wasn't what her hands wanted to do. He brought me the information, Quentin continued. I told him to close the file. You told him to close the file. I didn't know if she was mine, or I did know, and I didn't let myself think about it, and when I finally did. He stopped. He pressed his thumb against the edge of the table. I didn't approach you because I didn't have the right. You were keeping your options open. That's not. Is that her? Victoria's voice came from the doorway. Neither of them had heard the door open. She stood with one hand on the frame, her linen blazer still impeccable, and she looked at Eden with the expression of a woman who has walked to the middle of a conversation and understood immediately that she was the least informed person in it. Is what her? Quentin said. Victoria's voice had dropped an octave. The woman Ridley flagged, the one with the daughter. The little girl stirred in the booster seat. Petra made a small sound, resettled. None of them looked at her. You need to take your family and leave my cafe, Eden said. Victoria looked at her for a long moment. Then she looked at Quentin with the expression of someone receiving confirmation of something they'd hoped very hard wasn't true. She crossed the patio and picked Petra up. The girl barely woke, just looped her arms around Victoria's neck by instinct and walked back inside without speaking. Quentin stood. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Leave. I have a daughter, Eden said. Her name and her safety and her entire life are not things I'm going to discuss with you in a place where you just brought your fiancé. Go. He went. She stood on the empty patio and listened to his footsteps cross the cafe floor and the front door open and close. She looked at the crayon on the stone. She looked at the coffee cups, the indentations in the chairs. The morning light doing what morning light does when you're the only one left in it. Then she went inside, told the afternoon shift she was taking her break early, and walked 4 blocks to Lila's daycare. She stood on the sidewalk and looked through the window at her daughter sitting cross-legged on a mat with 6 other 4-year-olds, listening to their teacher read from a picture book about a fox who couldn't find her hat. Lila was frowning in concentration, the way she always did when she was paying close attention to something. She had her mother's jaw and her father's eyes. She had never been in the same room as the man those eyes came from. Eden had needed to believe that was the right call. Standing on that sidewalk, she wasn't sure what she believed anymore. She went back to work. She remade the cardamom batch because the first one had sat too long, and she prepped the afternoon case, and she picked Lila up at 4:30. On the walk home, Leela told her about the Fox book in full, including her analysis of the ending, which she found acceptable but not ideal. Eden said, "Really?" and "What happened next?" at the right intervals, and held her daughter's hand and thought about 11 months and what it meant that he'd known for 11 months and said nothing. She was still working through it when the knock came. 9:15. Lila was asleep. Eden was at her kitchen table with a cup of tea she'd forgotten about, looking at the week's supply order without seeing any of it, when someone knocked on her apartment door. 3 times, a pause, then twice more. She didn't know that pattern, but she stood up anyway. Through the peephole, Ridley, civilian jacket, hands visible at his sides, which she understood immediately was deliberate. She opened the door 3 inches. "He wants to talk," Ridley said. "No." Mrs. Calloway. His voice was the same as the one time she'd heard it years ago. Quiet, calibrated to produce the minimum possible escalation. 20 minutes. He's not here to pressure you. He had 20 minutes this morning. He spent them telling me his security team ran my name through a surveillance database for a year. Tell him no. Ridley absorbed this without expression. He said you'd say that. A pause that had weight to it. He also said to tell you that Harlan Drummond knows about your daughter. The hallway felt like it shrank. How? When Ridley's team ran the initial search 11 months ago, it may have triggered a flag on Drummond's end. His people run independent monitoring on anyone connected to Quentin's operation. May have. Likely, Ridley said. He said it the way people say things they've been told to soften and can't. What does Harlan Drummond want with my daughter? Leverage. Against Quentin. Against the merger terms. If Quentin has a biological child outside the alliance. She's 4 years old. I know. She's 4 years old and she's asleep 12 feet from where I'm standing, and I don't care what she represents to anyone's merger. She is a child. That is exactly why he needs to speak with you tonight. Eden looked at Ridley for a long moment, at his hands, at the hallway behind him. She opened the door. Quentin had been standing out of the peephole's line of sight. She registered that immediately. The operating instinct of a man who'd learned that showing up in full view of the door turns a conversation into a confrontation before it starts. He looked at her. She looked at him. There was nothing to say in the 2 seconds of that, so neither of them said anything. She stepped back. They came in. She stood in her kitchen. He stood on the other side of the table. Ridley positioned himself near the door without being asked. "Start," she said. He told her. Harlan Drummond had been engineering the merger with Ashford Capital for 4 years. The engagement to Victoria was the price named. Quentin had been stalling, building a case, financial records, communication logs between Drummond's operation and 2 federal judges, a city contract supervisor, documentation that had taken 3 years to compile legally without tipping anyone off. "I need 8 more weeks," he said, "to close the chain." She laughed short, hard. 8 weeks. "If I go to the FBI now, they'll cut a deal that protects me but leaves gaps. Drummond's inner circle walks. I need the full chain. And in 8 weeks, what happens to Lila?" The name landed. He went very still. She watched it happen, the way the name reached somewhere other words hadn't. "What's her name?" he said. She hadn't meant to say it. The name had come out because she was exhausted, and this was her kitchen, and she'd spent 4 years carrying that name as something that was purely hers, and now nothing was purely hers anymore. "Leela," she said. He breathed in once, slow. "She's mine," he said. Not a question. She understood now that it had never been a question for him. He had known for 11 months. He had run the same math she had, and he had stayed away for reasons she hadn't agreed to and hadn't been asked about. "Yes," she said, "she's yours." The silence after that had mass, the kind that belongs to the moment before something changes that won't change back. Ridley, near the door, looked at the wall. Quentin sat down. He didn't ask permission. His legs just went. He sat with one hand flat on the table, looking at nothing she could identify. She watched him process it. 4 years. Every birthday, every first word, every morning. And she watched him decide not to show her most of it, and she watched the small amount he couldn't contain. "I want to meet her." "No. You just told me Harlan Drummond knows she exists. You told me she's leverage, and now you want to introduce yourself? She needs to know who I am. She needs to be safe. Those 2 things aren't currently compatible. They can be. That's what I'm trying to build. That's what 8 weeks means." She leaned forward, both palms flat on the table. "You came into my cafe today with Victoria. You sat in my space with Victoria's daughter, and you did it while her father is apparently building a file on my child. What were you thinking? I didn't know you ran that cafe. You recognized me the second I walked in. I know. If you recognized me, then anyone watching you today. We swept the route. There was no surveillance. You cannot guarantee that." "No," he said, "I can't." Another silence. Somewhere in the building above, a television murmured through the ceiling. "I need you to trust me for 8 weeks," he said. "I trusted you for 7 months," she said. "You sent me a wire transfer with the word 'concluded' in the memo line. This isn't about me. This is about her." He met her eyes. "I will burn everything I've built. I will hand them every piece of it. But I need 8 weeks to make sure that when I do, Drummond goes down completely, and Lila is not a loose end that anyone has a reason to touch." The phrase "loose end," in the same sentence as her daughter's name, did something to the temperature of the room. "I need you to go tonight," she said. "Both of you. Tomorrow, I'll decide what I'm willing to consider, but right now I need to be alone in my apartment with my daughter. Ridley had the door open before Quentin was fully standing. At the threshold, Quentin stopped. He didn't turn all the way around. Just enough. She has my eyes, he said. Go home, Quentin, Eden said. He went. She locked the door, both locks. She stood with her back against it for a moment, and then she went to Lila's room and stood in the doorway and watched her daughter sleep. The small rise and fall of her chest, her fingers loosely curled near her cheek, her dark lashes against her skin. 4 years old, Fox books and strong opinions about shoes, and a laugh that started in her whole body. She was still standing there when her phone lit up on the counter. Unknown number. She answered. A man's voice, older, smooth in the way of people who had learned that volume was a tool for people who had run out of better options. Mrs. Calloway, he said, my name is Harlan Drummond. I think it's time we had a conversation about your daughter's future. Don't hang up. I know the name of her daycare. She did not hang up. Every reasonable instinct she had told her to hang up, call Quentin, take Lila, and run. But the man had said, I know the name of her daycare with the specific casualness of someone who understood that the most frightening thing is not a loud threat but a quiet fact. And hanging up on a man whose spoken facts would not make the facts disappear. How did you get this number? She said. The same way I get most things, he said. Patience and resources. He was older than she'd expected. Not frail. Nothing about the voice was frail. Worn smooth, the way certain things get when they've been used for a very long time. He spoke with the careful precision of someone who had decided each word was a tool. What do you want? To be direct. A pause. Deliberate. My daughter's engagement to Quentin Ashford represents 4 years of investment and the structural foundation of an arrangement that matters considerably to a number of people. Your daughter's existence complicates that structure. My daughter is 4 years old. Yes, which means the situation is still manageable. The word sat in the kitchen like something with weight. You relocate. I facilitate that. Somewhere comfortable, financially stable. Your daughter grows up without the weight of any of this. Quentin marries Victoria. Everyone continues. Eden looked at Lila's closed door. And if I don't, she said, then your daughter's existence becomes a matter of record within certain circles that would find it strategically interesting. And in those circles, Ms. Calloway, interesting children have a way of becoming complicated problems that require complicated solutions. A pause. I'm not threatening your daughter. I'm describing the environment she currently exists in. There's a difference. There isn't, she said. There really isn't. A sound that might have been acknowledgement. I'd like to meet tomorrow, somewhere public, your choice. I'll think about it. You have until 6 a.m., he said. After that, I make different arrangements. He hung up. She stood with the phone in her hand. Lila was asleep behind a door 3 feet away, and Harlan Drummond knew the name of her daycare, and Quentin needed 8 more weeks, and none of these things were compatible with each other in any way she could calculate. She called Quentin. He answered before the second ring. Drummond just called me, she said. 1 second of silence, then, where are you? My apartment. He knew my number. He knows the daycare. A pause. How long has he known about Lila? Silence. Quentin, how long? The initial search. He stopped. She heard him moving. I found out this afternoon that Drummond's people intercepted Ridley's search, not 11 months ago. He stopped again. Tell me, she said. 3 months ago. He's had the information for 3 months. She sat down on the kitchen floor, not dramatically. Her legs made the decision without consulting her. 3 months, she said. I didn't know his people had flagged it, I thought. For 3 months, a man who just told me my daughter's existence is manageable, has known where she goes every morning, and you didn't know. I'm coming over. You told me Ridley swept the route, no surveillance. There wasn't, not on our end. Drummond runs independent. You've been building a case for 3 years. Her voice was very quiet. The quiet was harder than anything louder would have been. You have people whose job is to know what Drummond knows. And for 3 months, his people were watching my daughter walk into a building, and no one on your side flagged it. I know. Do you understand what you're telling me? Call me when you're outside the building. She hung up. She went to Lila's room. She didn't turn on the light. She sat on the edge of the small bed in the dark and listened to her daughter breathe and ran the numbers on what she had. 1 apartment, 1 daughter who weighed 39 pounds and had a philosophy about shoes, 1 man with a collapsing timeline and a surveillance failure that covered a quarter of a year, 1 phone call from a man who called violence complicated solutions. Quentin arrived in 12 minutes. He came alone. He sat down. She stayed standing. She told him everything, not the version designed to manage her reaction. Everything. It took 20 minutes. By the end, she understood that Drummond's position was stronger than Quentin had represented. Not catastrophically stronger, but meaningfully. The case had a gap, a series of wire transfers through a subsidiary that his financial investigator had been trying to trace for 3 months without success. Without that thread, federal prosecution would reach Drummond's organization, but likely leave Drummond himself with enough insulation to walk. The 8 weeks, she said. That's the thread. And if you can't close it, I go to the FBI with what I have and hope the deal is structured well enough that his lawyers can't maneuver around the gaps. Hope, she said. Yes. She turned to the window, same street, same bodega light on the corner. The city, indifferent and continuous, the way she'd counted on. He wants to meet tomorrow. Public place. Don't. I know. I'm not meeting him. I'm telling you so you understand what we have 6 hours to solve. Quentin was quiet. Then, I need to make a call. An FBI contact I've been keeping warm for 2 years. If I bring her in now instead of in 8 weeks. You said you'd lose the wire chain. I might, but if Drummond is operating on a 48-hour window, 8 weeks isn't something I have anymore. He pulled out his phone. Give me 20 minutes. She gave him 20 minutes. She sat in Lila's room with a book she didn't open, listening to the low, continuous sound of Quentin's voice from the kitchen. The sound of a man spending everything he'd been saving for a specific moment, because the moment had come early and badly. At some point, Lila rolled over and said clearly, from deep in sleep, "That's not how hats work." Eden pressed her hand over her mouth and sat in the dark and almost laughed until it wasn't almost. She wiped her face on her sleeve and went back to the kitchen. Quentin was off the phone. "Agent Delacroix," he said. "She's been building a parallel case on Drummond's financial arm for 14 months. She has the wire chain." Eden went very still. "The gap I've been trying to close for 3 months. Her team traced it 6 weeks ago. She was waiting for me to come in. She thought I'd approach her. I thought I could build it independently." He set his phone on the counter. We both had half the case. Neither of us knew. Eden sat down. She pressed both palms flat on the table. She thought about what it meant that 2 separate investigations had been running in parallel. That 3 months of Lila being watched could have ended 3 months ago if 2 people had simply spoken 6 weeks earlier. "How soon can she move?" Eden said. "She wants a meeting tonight. If I agree to full cooperation, testimony, documentation, everything, she can have Drummond under federal surveillance lockdown by tomorrow night. No more independent movement. No more phone calls to Café owners." "And you?" "Witness protection, plea agreement, 18 months of legal process." He looked at her. "They'll relocate you and Lila as a condition of my cooperation. I made it the first term, before she told me about the wire chain, before I knew if she had anything useful at all." He held her gaze. "Your safety was the first condition." She didn't say anything. "I know it doesn't fix the 3 months," he said, "but I need you to know I said it first." She looked at the table. At the coffee ring she hadn't wiped up that morning that she apparently wasn't going to wipe up. "I want to meet the agent tonight," she said, "in the next 2 hours. If Drummond's timeline is 48 hours, I want eyes on a plan before I sleep. The meeting happened at a diner 2 miles away at 12:40 in the morning. Agent Sylvie Delacroix was 38, compact, wearing a jacket over what appeared to be pajama pants, and she looked at Eden across a laminate table with the direct assessment of someone who had made her evaluation in the first 30 seconds and was moving forward on it. "You're calmer than most people I meet in these circumstances," Delacroix said. "I have a 4-year-old, Eden said. Calm is a survival skill." Delacroix almost smiled. She opened a folder. The plan. Quentin would sign a formal cooperation agreement at 6 a.m. By noon, federal surveillance warrants on Drummond's primary operation. By tomorrow evening, Drummond under 24-hour federal watch. Any move on Lila or Eden documented in real time and constituting additional federal charges. "What about tonight?" Eden said, "between now and 6 a.m. 2 agents outside your building. Drummond will see them. That's intentional. It signals the conversation has changed without revealing we have a cooperation agreement. He'll assume Quentin went to a lower contact. Buys time. And if he moves before 6. Delacroix and Quentin exchanged a look that lasted half a second and told Eden everything she needed to know about whether this had already been discussed. "He called you tonight to offer terms," Delacroix said. "Men who offer terms don't move before they get an answer. He'll wait." Eden drank her coffee. It was terrible coffee, the kind that had stopped trying sometime around 2008. She drank it anyway. "I need to be home when Lila wakes up," she said. She stood. "Put your agents in place after 3 a.m. Anyone watching the street will be cold and less attentive. A cab home looks like nothing. An FBI vehicle is a signal." Delacroix looked at her for a moment. Then she looked at Quentin with an expression Eden chose not to interpret. "She's right," Quentin said. "I know," Delacroix said, 3 a.m. Eden got home at 1:10. She checked Lila. Still asleep, still convinced about hat mechanics. She locked both locks. She sat on the couch and did not sleep and watched the clock. At 2:50, she texted Quentin, still clear. At 3:12, she saw from her window the specific, not quite casual quality of a parked car that was trying very hard to belong to the street and not quite achieving it, and she allowed herself one full breath of something that was not quite relief but was adjacent to it. At 4:40, she got up and made coffee. Real coffee, the kind she ground herself. She stood at the kitchen window and waited for the city to get light. At 5:48, her phone rang. Unknown number. "I said 6, Harlan Drummond said. "I'm calling early because something has changed." She kept her voice level. "I'm listening. My daughter came home from your cafe yesterday very upset. Victoria has a sensitive temperament. She understood things in that meeting I suspect you didn't intend to make visible." A pause. "She took Petra and left this morning at 4. She went to her sister's in Indianapolis. She called my wife, not me." Eden's hand tightened on the phone. "The arrangement I've been protecting is destabilized," Drummond continued. "A destabilized arrangement means the people who depend on its stability become unpredictable. 2 of my associates, men who are not as patient as I am, became aware of your address at approximately 4:30 this morning." His voice did not change. "I'm telling you this because I would prefer a conversation to a crisis. In approximately 20 minutes, those 2 men will arrive at your building. I cannot recall them at this time without creating a different problem." The call ended. Eden was already moving. She went to Lila's room, turned on the light. Lila flinched and screwed up her face and said, "Mama." "We're going on a trip," Eden said. Her voice was completely steady. She was pulling Lila's shoes from under the bed and texting Quentin one-handed. "Drummond sent people, 20 men. Move now." Now Lila sat up, hair sideways. "It's dark." "Almost light. Shoes first, baby." Quentin's response came in 7 seconds. "Back exit. Ridley is 2 blocks out." "My rabbit," Lila said. Eden grabbed the stuffed rabbit off the pillow without breaking stride and put it in Lila's arms. "Got her. Let's go." They were in the back stairwell when she heard the front buzzer go. Lila looked up at her, small face, completely trusting. "Okay," Lila said. Eden lifted her 39 pounds. She took the stairs. "Okay," she said. They came out into the alley at 5:59 in the morning, and the city was gray and cold and just beginning to show light at the edges of the buildings. Ridley was standing at the alley entrance with a black car running, his hands visible at his sides, exactly as she'd expected. She ran toward him with her daughter in her arms and the rabbit wedged between them, and she did not look back. The car moved before the door was fully closed. Lila, half asleep, coat half buttoned, looked at the passing streetlights. Then at Ridley, then at her mother. "Where are we going?" she asked. Eden pulled her close. She pressed her lips to the top of Lila's head. "Somewhere safe," she said. Lila considered this with the seriousness she applied to all important information. "Is the sad man coming?" she said. Eden stopped breathing. "What?" she said. Lila reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small paper crane, the kind folded from a coffee sleeve, the specific brown of Bloom's branded cups, and held it up. "He was sitting outside the cafe," Lila said. "Last week, when you were inside, he made me this. He said his name was Quentin, and he looked really, really sad, like he was trying not to cry. I thought maybe he was my daddy because you said my daddy had the same eyes as me." Eden looked at the paper crane in her daughter's hand. "Last week, not today, not yesterday, last week." Quentin had met Lila a week ago outside her own cafe, had folded her a crane from a coffee sleeve like a man who didn't know what else to do with his hands. And then he had walked into that cafe the next morning and ordered a booking and asked about the cardamom syrup and let her believe that all of it, all of the stakes and all of the timelines were exactly what he'd described, while the whole time he had already met their daughter and hadn't said a word. Ridley was looking at the road. His jaw was set. He had known. Of course he had known. Eden looked at the crane. She looked at her daughter's face, open, waiting, patient in the way of someone who had not yet learned that some answers take years. "We'll talk about it later," she said. Her voice came out steady. She had no idea how. Nobody spoke for 5 blocks. At the 6th block, she said, "Ridley, Mrs. Calloway." "When?" A pause. "Last Thursday. He followed you from daycare pickup. He watched for 2 days first. On Thursday, she was out front with you, and you went to answer your phone, and she walked up to him at the bench." Ridley stopped. He was only there for 8 minutes. He didn't plan to speak to her. She walked up and asked why he looked sad. And he made her a crane. He didn't know what else to do with his hands. No, Eden said, he wouldn't have. Lila had fallen back against Eden's side, the paper crane still in her fist. She'd carried it in her coat pocket for a week and said nothing. This small folded thing from a man she'd decided was her father because he had her eyes and looked like he was trying not to cry. Her daughter had kept it for a week and not told her. Apparently, that was inheritable. Eden's phone lit up. "Quentin, 2 blocks behind you. Delacroix is mobilizing. We need to talk." She typed back, "I know." The safe house was a brownstone in Logan Square with flower boxes in the windows. Ridley's, as it turned out. His aunt lived on the top floor. The second-floor apartment had juice boxes in the refrigerator and a collection of picture books on the coffee table that Ridley said his aunt kept for her grandchildren. Lila woke fully when the car stopped and looked at the building with the evaluating expression she used for new places. "Does anyone here have a cat?" she asked Ridley. "My aunt has 2, he said. Lila looked at Eden with something approaching approval. Quentin arrived 11 minutes later. He came in, looked at Eden, and opened his mouth. "Don't," she said. He closed it. "Last Thursday," she said. He didn't deny it. That was one thing. He stood there and took it without constructing a defense, which was the only thing keeping her voice as low as it was. "You met my daughter," she said, "without asking, without telling me, and then you sat across from me in my cafe and let me think none of this had started yet. I wasn't going to tell her who I was." His voice was even. "She walked up to me. She asked why I looked sad. It wasn't a plan, Eden." He stopped. "She has your exact frown when she's thinking hard, the same set of the jaw." She walked up and asked why I looked sad, and I folded her a crane because I didn't know what else to do, and she said thank you like I'd given her something real, and he pressed his fist against his mouth for a moment. I should have told you. I know. You made decisions based on incomplete information. Again. Yes. The same pattern. I protect information because I think it protects the situation, and I'm wrong, and you get hurt. He met her eyes. I'm sorry. I don't need sorry right now, she said. I need to know that starting from this moment, everything you know is something I know. Every piece, every timeline, no managed information. Yes. Say it like you mean it. I mean it. She looked at him for a long moment, then Delacroix, how long until she moves? He pulled out his phone. She executed the surveillance warrants at 5:40. Drummond's primary line went dark 14 minutes ago. He knows we're listening. She's moving to arrest stage. He looked up. The 2 men he sent to your building were picked up at 6:08. Federal custody. One breath. Drummond himself. Mobile. Not at his primary residence or either secondary. He knew Delacroix was already moving. He had a leak. A paralegal in the U.S. Attorney's Office. She's been flagging case movement to a Drummond cutout for 7 months. She flagged the warrant request at 5:29, 12 minutes before execution. Is she in custody? As of 20 minutes ago, the leak is closed. Then tell Delacroix to move faster, Eden said. The arrest happened at 11:30 that morning at a property in Wisconsin. Eden wasn't there. She watched the clock from the Logan Square apartment while Lila slept on the couch and Ridley made calls from the kitchen in a low, continuous voice. At 12:44, her phone rang. One in custody, Quentin said. Premises clear. She sat down on the floor, not dramatically. Her legs made the decision without her. Then Lila's voice from the couch, Mama, I'm hungry. Eden got up, because Lila was hungry, because that was what the morning required. And she made a plate with crackers and the apple slices she found in the refrigerator. And she sat beside her daughter while Lila ate and explained, at considerable length, the correct method for sorting crackers by shape before consuming them. The cooperation agreement took 4 hours at a federal building in the Loop. Eden waited in a hallway with bad lighting and mediocre coffee from a cart downstairs, watching the clock. When Quentin came out, he looked like a man who had just handed over everything he'd been carrying for 3 years. His attorney shook his hand and left. Quentin stood in the hallway and looked at Eden. Done, he said. She stood. She handed him the remainder of her coffee because he looked like he needed it more than she did, and he took it without comment. It was the most natural exchange they'd had in 4 years. Outside, the city moved the way it always moved, indifferent, continuous, asking nothing. A food truck was arguing about parking with a delivery driver. A woman walked past on her phone discussing a timeline that had apparently been deeply disrespected. What happens now? He said. Delacroix said we have about 10 days before relocation logistics are ready. You can move within the city with monitoring. You can see Lila during the 10 days if you want. He looked at her. She asked about you this morning, Eden said. She wanted to know if the sad man was going to come back. What did you tell her? I told her maybe. She accepted that. She's a practical kid. Almost a smile from both of them. Neither quite managed it, which was accurate to where they were. She took the subway home. She picked Lila up from daycare, the last time she would pick her up from this particular daycare, from this teacher, from this building, with the mural of animals on the exterior wall that Lila had loved from the first day. She thought about that without saying it. She held Lila's hand on the walk home and let her talk about the Fox book, which had apparently been reread today, and which Lila had new opinions about. The week passed the way weeks had always passed, shift by shift, the ordinary machinery of a life that was about to change in ways she couldn't fully see yet. Quentin came on Wednesday. He texted first, which was progress. He brought a proper origami crane. Real paper, deep blue, and Lila saw it from the window before he even reached the door and said he came back with a satisfaction that suggested she had expected this all along. He stayed 3 hours. They ate dinner at Eden's kitchen table, all three of them, and Lila told him about the Fox book in full, including her theory on hat-related narrative tension, and Quentin listened with focused attention and asked questions that showed he'd actually been following. And Lila approved of him with the directness of someone who hadn't yet learned to moderate her assessments. After Lila was asleep, they sat at the kitchen table with the remains of dinner between them. "Tell me about the town," she said. He'd spent 2 days with Delacroix's relocation team, a small town in Michigan, a lake, public schools that consistently ranked well, a farmer's market on Saturdays, a community that absorbed new residents without too many questions, a house with a yard and a stand of birch trees along the back fence. "What would you do," she said, "for work?" He was quiet for a moment. "There's a cabinet maker there, 63 years old, looking for someone to help with the physical side of the work while his knees hold out. He doesn't know who I am. He thinks I'm someone in a relocation program." "You'd build cabinets." "I'd build something that exists when you're done with it, something that didn't require anyone to be afraid." He looked at his hands. "I've spent 12 years managing things that only worked because people were afraid. I'd like to try the other kind." She looked at him. He was telling the truth. She had learned in 7 months, and in 4 years, and in this past week, how to tell when he was telling the truth. And this was the particular quality of it. "I have conditions," she said. "Tell me." She told him, full information always, no managed versions. Lila learns who he is on a timeline Eden sets. When the legal process gets hard, and it would, he talks to someone qualified, not just her. "Yes," he said, "all of it." She looked at the table. At the coffee ring she hadn't wiped up that morning. "I'm not in love with you right now," she said. "I want you to know that. I was, for a long time, and I don't know what's on the other side of the next 2 years. But I'm not going into this because I think we'll naturally find our way back. I know. What we had was built on incomplete information. That's not a foundation." No, it wasn't. "So if something gets built, it starts from scratch, from whatever we actually are." He nodded. "Then what are we right now?" she said. She thought about it, genuinely, for a moment. "Two people who have a daughter and a relocation date," she said, "and maybe enough honesty between us finally to figure out the rest." "That's more than I had a week ago," he said. "It's more than I had a week ago, too," she said. "Don't waste it." The relocation happened 12 days later. Lila spent most of the drive north, explaining to her rabbit the rules of the new place, which she was still working out, but which seemed to involve lakes and the correct number of trees. The town was called Millhaven, population 6,000, a main street with a diner, a hardware store, a library that looked like it had been there long enough to have opinions, and a small coffee shop with a hand-painted sign, family-owned, visibly loved, that Eden walked past 3 times before she went in. The owner, a man named Boyd, who had inherited the place from his grandmother and was running it with visible love and invisible exhaustion, looked at her across the counter and said, "You know what's wrong with my espresso machine just by looking at it, don't you? Your grind is inconsistent," she said, "and your tamper pressure is uneven." He looked at her for a moment. "You want a job?" She started the following Monday. The first year was the second hardest of her life, after the year Lila was born. Quentin's testimony process was exactly what Delacroix had described: slow, grinding, requiring his presence in Detroit twice a month for legal proceedings that sometimes stretched to 3 days. He came home from those days with a specific quiet on him that she recognized as the weight of having to say, out loud, in formal settings, everything he had done and sanctioned and failed to stop. She didn't push him to talk on those nights. She made dinner. She let Leela drag him to the yard to look at whatever Leela was currently investigating, which rotated between a family of ducks at the lake 2 blocks away, a colony of ants near the garden wall, and a patch of clover she had decided was inhabited by very small and very private people. He built cabinets. He came home from the first week, with his hands roughed up in a way they hadn't been before, and said almost nothing about it, except that Boyd's grandfather, who had built the original counters in the coffee shop by hand, had apparently been someone worth knowing. Lila started kindergarten in September. She walked in on the first day, holding her rabbit under one arm and Quentin's hand with the other, and she turned at the classroom door and looked at both of them and said, "Okay, bye," and went in. Quentin stood in the hallway of an elementary school in a town that wasn't his name and watched his daughter walk away, and he made a sound that was almost nothing, almost completely contained. Eden touched his arm briefly. He looked at her. His eyes were bright. "Come on," she said. "She's fine." They walked out together. He held the door. She went through. Their routes diverged half a block later. She went left toward the coffee shop. He went right toward the cabinet maker's workshop. Ordinary. The thing they had both spent 4 years rebuilding from different directions arrived at somehow from the same one. The federal hearings concluded in the 19th month. Quentin's testimony contributed to 18 convictions, including 3 senior figures in Drummond's operation, whose cases had stalled for years waiting for a cooperating witness with his specific knowledge. Delacroix called to say, the Bureau considered the cooperation agreement a success, which Eden understood was as close to a thank you as the institution was going to get. She was calibrating the grinder when the call came. She listened, said a few words, hung up, went back to the calibration. Boyd looked at her from across the counter. "Good news?" "End of a chapter," she said, "I think." That evening, she and Quentin sat on the porch after Lila was asleep. They did this sometimes when the evening was the right kind of quiet. 2 chairs the cabinet maker had built as a gift at the end of the first year. Solid wood, uncomplicated, the kind that lasted. "Is it done?" he said. "The legal part," she said. "The rest you carry." He nodded. He knew. They sat in the specific silence of 2 people who had been through something together and were on the other side of it. "I've been thinking about the courthouse," she said. He went very still. "There's one on Main Street. I drove past it 4 months ago, and I've been deliberately not thinking about it, which is how I know I'm thinking about it." "Eden." "I'm not asking right now," she said. "I'm telling you where I am. There's a difference." "Okay," he said. "Thank you for telling me." An owl started somewhere in the birch trees along the back fence, went on for a while, and then stopped. "Lila asked me again today," he said, "about before, about why she didn't know me when she was little." The questions had been arriving once a month or so, each one slightly more specific than the last, the careful inquiry of a child building a picture piece by piece. "What did you tell her?" "That her mom and I were in a difficult situation and made different choices, that some of those choices meant missing time we shouldn't have missed, that the missing wasn't her fault and I was sorry for it." He paused. She said okay. Then she asked if we could have waffles tomorrow. Eden breathed in the night air, lake water and cut grass, and the particular clean of somewhere without too much concrete. "Waffles are achievable," she said. "That's what I figured." She went inside first. She checked on Lila, sprawled sideways with her arms flung wide, like a person who had strong opinions about how much space she was entitled to. She adjusted the blanket. She stood in the dark doorway and looked at her daughter and thought about paper cranes and coffee sleeves and the specific luck of having arrived here, on this side of all of it, in a house with a yard and a workshop 2 miles away, and an owl. She was almost asleep when Lila patted down the hall. The door opened 3 inches. "Mama." Is the sad man still sad?" She thought about it, about a man 2 miles away, who came home with sawdust in his collar and sat in a chair someone else had built and listened to owls. About 18 months of formal depositions worked through carefully, and a counselor he'd started seeing every other week without being asked twice. Less than he was, she said. Lila considered this. "Good," she said, with the satisfaction of someone updating a record. "Okay." She padded back down the hall, her door closed. Eden lay in the dark and looked at the ceiling and thought about a courthouse on Main Street she'd been deliberately not thinking about for 4 months. They went on a Thursday morning in April. Lila came because she'd asked to, and they'd said yes, because the answer to Lila's questions about before was always going to be more honesty, not less. She wore her blue dress, the one with the pockets, and carried her rabbit, and stood between them in front of a clerk named Ruth, who had been processing paperwork in that office for 20 years, and received the occasion with the gentle practicality of someone who had seen every version of this moment and found all of them, more or less, worth witnessing. No guests, no flowers arranged in advance, no vows written beforehand, because neither of them had been able to find language adequate to what they were actually doing, which was not celebrating what they'd had, but acknowledging what they'd built from what remained of it. Ruth asked if they wanted to say something. Eden looked at Quentin. He looked at her. He had sawdust in the crease of his collar because he'd come from the workshop. She had a coffee ground under one fingernail because she'd come from the cafe. Neither of them had thought to fix this. "I'm going to try," she said. That was what she had. That was what she meant. "I know," he said. "I am too." Ruth said the official words. Lila announced midway through that the rabbit wanted to participate also and held her up to demonstrate. Ruth incorporated the rabbit without altering her expression, which was a professional achievement Eden would think about for years. They walked out into the April morning. The street was doing what small-town streets do on Thursday mornings, proceeding with its business entirely unbothered by the specific occasions of the people in it. Lila put her hand in Eden's, then her other hand in Quentin's. She swung between them for half a block, with the complete absorption of someone who had decided this was an excellent development and was already moving forward. "Can we get waffles?" she said. "It's 10:30 in the morning," Eden said. "Waffles don't have a time," Lila said. This was a conviction she had been developing for some time and clearly felt was settled. They got waffles. The years arrived after that the way years do when you stop trying to control their shape. One season delivering quietly to the next. Lila grew. The rabbit lost an eye, and Quentin replaced it with a button that was slightly the wrong shade of brown. And Lila declared it better this way, more interesting, and that was that. The coffee shop expanded. Eden bought a stake in the operation in the second year and hired 2 people. One of them reminded her of herself at 24, and she told her so, which startled the girl and then seemed to mean something. They had a son. They named him Fen, short, clean, belonging only to him. He arrived in February with his father's stillness and his mother's jaw and a volume that suggested he had things to say and intended to say them immediately. Lila was 6, and she took his arrival with great seriousness. She conducted what she described as an orientation, the contents of which she kept between herself and Fen. One afternoon in the fall, Fen was 4, Lila was 10, the birch trees along the back fence going gold. A letter arrived with no return address. Eden opened it at the kitchen table. Inside was a small card. On the front, a photograph of a young woman at a graduation ceremony, dark-haired, smiling with the fullness of someone who had worked toward a specific destination and arrived. On the back, in careful handwriting, "Thank you for the crane you taught him to fold." She read it twice, then again. Quentin came in from the yard, where he'd been stacking firewood, and she handed him the card without speaking. He read it. He turned it over and looked at the photograph. He turned it back. Petra, 3.5 years old in a monogrammed booster seat, tearing a napkin into pieces. Now a woman with a diploma, writing notes in careful handwriting that said she'd thought about it for a while. "She's okay," Eden said. "She's okay," Quentin said. He set the card on the table between them. They sat with it for a while. Outside, Lila was calling Fen from somewhere in the yard with the specific impatient cadence of an older sibling who has been patient longer than should be asked of anyone. Fen's response suggested he had differing information about the situation and intended to share it. Eden got up and started dinner. She could hear her daughter and her son arguing in the yard about something enormous that would matter tremendously for the next 4 minutes and not at all after that. She could hear Quentin finding somewhere safe to put the card. The kitchen had coffee grounds on the counter and a pot on the stove and a window that looked out at the birch trees going gold in the late afternoon light. She measured the coffee. She set the water to heat. The grind, the bloom, the pour, the honest process of a thing that either works or it doesn't. She watched the first small bloom of grounds rise to the surface, the way it did when everything was right. It worked.